Terminator. The Sarah Connor Chronicles. 2,000 degrees. Cameron climbed down the old ladder. The rusty metal crumbled beneath her boots, and she reached the bottom 8 meters below. The hatch opening was now nothing more than a small square of light lost in the darkness. A bit of sand fell on his face and into his hair. Cameron shook himself. Here is hell. The pale glare of the torch illuminated the rows of rough wooden shelves that lined the small tunnel. Cameron found the switch, near the ladder, and after a few seconds, a yellow light filled the basement. The bulbs hung miserably from the ceiling. Assault rifles, boxes of ammunition, single cartridges, and armor-piercing bullets with tungsten heads and fragmentation grenades. The shelves were loaded with contraband. A little further on, plastic bags filled with white powder. This one wasn't put in a homemade bomb, but went in through the nose and tickled the pleasure zone. There's 15 or 20 million worth, John had said, dumping the contents of the big can of gasoline on the ground. A little further on, there was a machine gun on a stand, and just behind it, an overturned table with 3 crumpled blue polar blankets on the floor and a pack of mineral water. And also the bodies of the 3 smugglers. The 3 men lay there, covered in blood and urine. One of them had his neck bent at an odd angle, and his head was turned toward her. Large, glassy eyes like spider eggs stared at her. Cameron didn't know why, but it made her uncomfortable. She closed the distance between them and knelt down next to the body, gently closing her eyelids. Burn them. We must not leave any trace. The task was simple. Like cremating an endoskeleton, Cameron told herself. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. She vowed to die of old age before the thermite box with her name on it found her. She grabbed the can from the shelf and emptied the last liter over their bodies. Not a trace left, you hear me? The smell of the liquid was disturbing too. Something mechanical, something alive. Humans didn't realize it, but to her, it was like smelling bile and blood and that taste of iron on the tip of your tongue. A small puddle of gasoline formed around the smugglers. The liquid soaked their clothes and rolled down small stretches of sand to the grenades wedged against the earthen wall at the back. If the media ever got too overzealous and the cops had to find the source of the fire, they wouldn't have to look far, John had whispered as he set up the explosives. She had winked conspiratorially at him then, but apparently covering up homicides was no laughing matter. Failed again. The cyborg tossed the canister aside and walked past the impressive stockpile of weapons one last time, walking slowly and reverently, as if she were walking through a temple, about to break a sacred idol. On the other row were hundreds of kilos of cocaine. Some of the bags were stained with blood, brown and clotted. The first bullet had hit the man in the chest, sending a geyser of blood into the tunnel. They had tried to clean it up, but despite their efforts, it hadn't gone away. Cameron wiggled his fingers slightly and imagined the feeling of the sticky blood that had still stuck to his knuckles just hours earlier. No more traces also meant no more stains. The fire would take care of that. One of the bags of cocaine must have been punctured because some of the powder had fallen to the ground. Cameron crouched down and scooped some onto her fingertips. Tickle the pleasure zone. She brought her fingers to her lips and licked them. She stood up abruptly and spat the substance out, coughing to get it all out of her mouth. This powder, any cyborg would have recognized it. It was the kind you had in the back of your throat before you died. Thermite, and there was some everywhere on the ground and on the shelves. It was hidden in the sand too, the mixture of metals grayer than cocaine, shards of silver lost in the brown. Had John put that in there? They were just supposed to sterilize the evidence, not melt the guns, ladder, and timbers with it. Make it look like an accidental fire, nothing more. Now there was enough thermite to boil the wall. Cameron traced the path of the fine metallic powder with his finger. The trails went up the shelf. Cans of food were lined up at the very top. She turned over a crate and climbed on top. She carefully picked up one of the cans and looked at it closely. It had been closed on top and a label had been recently removed because the glue had not completely dried. Otherwise, the aluminum was perfectly clean, as if it had come out of the factory. But behind its place on the shelf, The top of the wall and the ceiling were stained with blood. The blood was also recent. It dated from this morning. It shouldn't have hit the wall, unless the cans were placed there after the shooting. Cameron closed her fist, knuckles forward, and smashed the can. A small river of thermite flowed between her fingers. She picked up another can and tore off the lid. Thermite, and she kept going. More thermite, and still that congealed blood just behind it. Cameron threw the last box across the room, and it crashed against the back wall with a clatter. The flammable powder fell slowly on the bodies like a rain of ash. She then noticed that the palms of her hands were gray, and the fibers of her sweater were also impregnated with thermite. She had to get that off. She couldn't stand to be covered in it. She had to go back up and wash her entire body, even the insides if she could. John should have warned her that he was planning on wiping this entire basement off the map. Cameron jumped down from the register and strode toward the exit. She reached into her jacket pocket to grab the tissue and wipe her hands, but as she pulled it out, something fell to the floor. She tilted her head to the side. It was a small bag, like the ones lined up on the shelves to her left, but the powder that filled that bag was a different color. She pulled out the same bag from her other pocket. Another one was hidden in her inside pocket. It all made no sense. Then everything fell into place. Here is hell. She shook her hair frantically, and a cloud of gray dust enveloped her face and burned her throat. It wasn't sand that had fallen on her. Cameron ran towards the ladder and tripped over one of the crates. Her body hit the ground hard. She coughed to get the thermite out of her body, but the metal stuck to her skin, her tongue, and now her clothes. No, not like that, not like that. She stood up as fast as she could and reached the bottom of the ladder in less than a second. At the very top, a face was leaning over the hole. It was John. He didn't move when he saw her, but his eyes squeezed shut, and something liquid fell onto Cameron's face. His HUD automatically displayed human tear fluid. Something black and metallic was sticking out of John's neck. Cameron screamed his name, but he didn't answer. He just cried, not daring to look at her. The one pointing the barrel of the gun at the base of John's skull, then leaned over the hole, blocking out the sun. It was a woman. Long brown hair fell on either side of an Asian face, and full lips twisted slowly into a horrible sneer. Jessie Flores. When she saw the wide, panicked eyes staring at her 8 meters below, the human kicked some sand with her foot and Cameron had to look away. Then something heavy hit the ground. A small green gas canister rolled at her feet. The valve was open and hissing slightly. Soon the smell of ozone filled her nostrils. "Look at her," Jessie shouted, pressing his revolver to John's temple. He refused, and wrinkles appeared at the corners of his eyes and on his forehead as he closed his eyelids. Tears rolled down his cheeks. His hardened face had suddenly lost a few years, and he was that lost teenager again. At that moment, Cameron knew what was going to happen. She thought about everything, and she only kept the good. In a split second, she saw the birthday cake and the words "Happy Construction Day" written in frosting on the charred chocolate. She saw herself holding the bird in her hands in the park, and John smiling as he looked at her in the shade of the oak tree. She saw John stepping on her feet when she taught him to dance. She saw those green eyes sometimes caressing her body like a lover's hands would. And she saw Derek Reese thanking her and Sarah Connor whispering, "We're okay." And Cameron closed her eyes and cried because soon this was all going to disappear in a flash, a flashback. "You should have listened to me, John," Jessie hissed. She pulled the silver lighter out of her pocket. The flame was barely visible in the bright blue sky, just little ripples of heat. His fingers relaxed. The lighter would hit the ground in 0.83 seconds. It all happened between 2 heartbeats. "No!" John yelled at the top of his lungs, and he pulled away from the axis of the cannon, just enough. Before the lighter even reached the first rung of the ladder, Cameron had taken the safety off her pistol. She felt with strange acuity every construction feature, every dent in the weapon, every rough spot. Glock 17, handgun, hollow point bullets, 0.3 millimeter deflection. Cameron fired. The bullet traveled at over half a mile per second and passed through Jesse's right eye before the sound reached his ears. His head was thrown back and his vertebrae shattered. His fingers squeezed the trigger in a last reflex, but the cartridge sliced through the air, where John had been 0.48 seconds earlier. The lighter was now in the middle of the ladder. Exponential acceleration of the falling speed. 0.34 seconds before impact. There were things she wanted to try. Eating Ben and Jerry's ice cream in front of friends, getting her degree in applied mathematics, being weightless. Make love. But John was alive, and that's all that mattered. 0.28 seconds. It was fun. Humans placed great value on their last words, and it was a right granted even to the worst murderers before lethal injection. Not to machines, though. No, that right only applied to men. 0.12 seconds. Cameron didn't close his eyes and stood with his shoulders high. She might not have been human, but she had suffered. She had felt that little jolt of liquid electricity in her belly every time John had held her. She had felt the air between her toes and spoken the language of the soul to a chop-in tune. She had been a cat, too. She had been Cameron Phillips, Cameron Baum, and she had been Cameron Connor. It wasn't so bad being a Connor, and no one could take that away from him. Before the gas ignited and engulfed her body, she had time to shout these last words into the light. I love you, John. 0 seconds. The next moment, it was hell. A 2,000-degree hell.